it's Lauren Hollows from Aniwaya Education Services, and I am back with the Divine Miss N for part 2 of Assessment 101. If you guys didn't check out our last one that we did 30 seconds ago, but you would have seen last week, you can check that out. I will make sure I put the link in below. But we are going through Vanessa's wonderful book of 101 assessment tips. I love all 101 of them. We've literally just been talking about which ones we want to cover. We want to cover all of them.
There's too many.
It's probably a bit too much for us to do today. We're going to start today, though, talking about direct evidence and indirect evidence, because I know I've covered this before. I know Vanessa's had multiple conversations with me about this before, but still a struggle session, guys, isn't it?
Tell me why you think everybody struggles with it.
Well, because I don't think people understand evidence. I think that people think about the assessment process and they think about engaging in the assessment process, but initially everyone started out as a trainer. And we did this because we liked talking to people and we liked passing on our skills.
Sharing.
And that was what being a trainer was back in the old days. I'm going to get bitten by a green ant. I'm very scared. And then like 2015 there was really a focus on like how we assess.
Yes.
Right. That's probably really when that started to come into play. And it was like, yeah, guys, we can't actually just take your word for it that you've done some assessment. We actually need to see some assessment being done.
That's why that is actually why I think everybody finds evidence quite confusing, is because there's an opinion bias and an assumption built into so many assessment tools. And
then the actual focus on the actual assessment only came in the last like 3 years as to like, yeah, but we actually need to see some sort of evidence against every single part of the unit. And I like genuinely will say, I think it's only in the last 3 years that they've really honed in on this, right? Like, what is the evidence? And so it's just not something that most trainers who've been training for 20 years have had to think about.
Yeah.
So we don't get evidence. So when we then say, well, what are the types of evidence that you're collecting? We just get blank stares back.
Yeah.
And
I haven't got a clue.
love all of you TAE providers, but please, God, can you spend some more time on the fact that they need to train and engage the learner. They need to conduct the assessment as per, like, in line with principles of assessment rules of evidence. But then they need to, their job is actually to collect evidence. There's 3 parts to the job. 3, right? Training, assessment, evidence collection. They have to do all 3. If you're a trainer and assessor, you have to do all 3.
Yes. And it's not as hard as everybody makes out. And I think that's one of the other things they don't do is because of fear.
Yeah.
Or they're just trying to, get through they think collecting evidence is just filling out all of the boxes.
Yeah. I tick the boxes.
It ticks the boxes.
I tick the boxes and they answer the questions.
Yeah.
We're good.
Yeah.
No, we're not.
But there's a big difference between direct and indirect.
So what is direct evidence?
Direct evidence is I am watching you do something.
In person.
Oh, yeah. In person.
In person. You can do it. You can actually,
this is considered in person.
It becomes a lot more challenging to do it like this.
You have to observe and witness it. And it's not just, I saw them do it. You actually have to record what you saw. Now, I hope lots of assessment tools that are direct evidence of observation assist you with this, but aren't like so long-winded, they're great big statements. But what you write down as what you saw is just as important. The type of environment in which you were watching them do it, that's direct as well.
Yeah. And I mean, look, for me, this is where we try and get the students involved in that process. So when you're doing big group assessments and let's say you're having to have 15 students cook the dish all at the same time, or, you're in the workplace observing 3 or 4 trainees, serving customers or, anything along those lines. Hopefully the students are involved in some of the documenting of that context.
Absolutely.
Because it's a lot easier, especially with group assessments, to have the students involved and documenting that context as opposed to trying to get trainers. If you have trainers asking them to comment on every single question criteria,
You set them up to fail.
Yeah, it's never going to happen. It's unfair. It's actually unfair. And it's the one time where I will actually turn around and go, your trainers are fair when they say you have shit assistants. Like, a lot of the times that criticism is not overly fair, but when you do that, yeah, okay, I'll give it. That's fair.
The big tip for this tip in the 101 assessment tips for direct evidence is, I am directly watching this and move all over the book, is to have that conversation before assessment with your student or your candidate or client or whoever you want to call yourselves. But if they are clear with what needs to be collected and understood that if you're going to show me that you're competent to do a particular task, then these are the things I need to see from you, then you're not giving them the answer because they still have to perform it. And you are directly observing them doing the observation, the performance, the task, the activity, whatever it happens to be.
Yeah. And we say this all the time. Like, if I tell you that in order to communicate effectively, you need to maintain good body language, you need to maintain eye contact, you need to keep your tone and your pace nice and comfortable and flowing. I can tell you all of those things. That's not giving you the answers, because just because I tell you to do them doesn't mean you're actually going to know how to do them. In the same way that, like, if you're observing an interaction of a negotiation, I can say, make sure you stay calm the entire time. That doesn't mean that you're going to stay calm.
No, I'll give you an example of that. Recently, I did a pitch at the EdTech conference, and they gave you criteria in which you had to cover in your pitch. So your slide deck can show you what those criteria are going to cover content-wise, but it still was down to me to present it.
Yeah.
Because another criteria is how I presented the idea, the impact, and the growth forward. So, you know, it's one thing to say this is the criteria, it's another thing to perform it. But here's the other thing, is direct evidence isn't from one form of assessment.
No.
It has to be from a variety of different activities. And you can therefore observe and directly gather that evidence in different ways to show somebody is competent in doing that task.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, look, this is where, so the best examples of this, and almost every unit, like, if you don't see this, we're just being attacked.
Welcome to Cairns, everybody.
So if you are, like, every assessment, I'm going to go out on a limb here, every assessment should have some sort of observation checklist. It would be very rare.
It'd be very difficult to not have.
Very, very difficult not to have it, right?
Well, I mean, part of the plane.
Every time.
Yes.
Still let it pass by. Not editing this out either. Staying.
Yeah, absolutely. So even if your assessment was a project,
yes,
it's still considered as direct observation, because you could have somebody have a competency conversation about that project, or you could present the outcome of that project. There is still elements of the direct observation, for example, in different methods of assessment.
Yeah. And I mean, even in projects, you need to actually have, there's often a checklist of, like, what you need to observe within that project. That's, like, we see that all of the time.
Yes.
Where, you know, people go, oh, well, you need to write a budget, or you need to write a business plan. And then there's no guts in there as to, like, but what do I need to see in the business plan? And, like, you know, what does that look like?
Yeah.
What is a good version of that? So,
but a lot of those ones can be both indirect and direct.
True.
Which leads us to the indirect evidence.
So what is indirect evidence?
So indirect evidence could be gathered over a period of time using other people's observation as well. So using some direct evidence.
Yep.
It could be a collection of activities that they've done, but you weren't necessarily there directly watching them, or they've practically attached themselves to doing it. So there is a lot more indirect evidence that should be used and could be used, but isn't necessarily used. And
I mean, especially, guys, there's a lot of situations that you're just not going to be able to always capture, especially if you're doing workplace based. So this book gives a good example of one of the units. So from our CHCEC 007, you need to complete 120 hours in at least one of the regulated education care services. And it says that evidence must be demonstrated in a regulator. So it has to be done in a workplace environment. There's lots of examples of this. We've got this in individual support. We've got this in patisserie. We've got this in commercial cookery.
Hospitality.
Yeah. So there's like so many different training packages where they're now requiring these like, you know, very, very quantitative measures. So
I love that.
this is,
it's just not possible for somebody to be there all the time.
no. You're not, and it wouldn't be viable in any way, shape, or form to have somebody go out and watch a student in the workplace for 120 hours. Like, qualifications would have to cost $100,000.
But this is where those assessment tools and instruments must include what is needed for the person to do a particular task over that period of time, whether there has to be variation in that task, such as the barista one's really good because they have so many different coffees they have to do.
32 different types of coffees.
Yeah. So it's not just do it once and you're all good to go. You have to do it multiple occasions with different types of coffees. And that's real world.
Yeah.
You're not going to get in childcare. You're not going to get the same child every single time. You're going to get a variety of children doing a variety of things, and you have to be able to cope in that situation. And assessments in our industry must assist the student to be able to cope in the real world.
Yeah. And it does boil down to like a lot of the reason why they put a lot of these quantitative requirements in is because they actually want the student to experience the challenges that occur in the workplace. So what happens when you get the kid that is feeling cranky and just decides to scream for 2 hours? Like, how does the student respond to that? Okay. You know, what happens? Yeah. What happens when you get, you know, when you've got like, you know, 50 coffee orders to get out in the next 15 minutes, you know, like that's a very, very common situation. And I tell you right now, a great barista can get a coffee out in under a minute, you know, whereas I've also sat there and seen baristas that take like 6 minutes of coffee. And I'm like, how did you get past the course? Like, that's not to industry standard in any way, shape, or form. When you're in a kitchen,
those assessments were tick and flick.
You know, and when you're in a kitchen, it says like in some of them, they say it's got to be, you've got to have like that staff to customer ratio and things like that. This is where a lot of these quantitative requirements come in because they really want to see that being experienced. But then we've got to think about what is the best way to capture that evidence. Now, it's not going to be an assessor observing 120 hours or 48 complete food service periods. So, you know, it's going to be a combination of a portion of direct evidence. You know, we might go out and observe 2 of the 48 sessions, or, you know, we might be there for 4 of the 120 hours. But then how do we collect the rest of that evidence? You know, so
a lot of that is done through logbooks.
Yep. Reflections.
And so, yes, reflections of themselves. Third-party reports are also another way of doing it.
This is where, guys, you know, if it is a third-party report, you've got to think about who is the right person to collect that evidence.
Yes.
You know, how, like, what are we requiring that person to have?
RTO should also provide support for those as well, because it's not their job necessarily if they have more than one person they're observing. Then they really have to understand their role and responsibility in it. And this is where your assessment instruments must be clearly articulating instructions. It's like, don't assume they know. Don't just because you know and it's your opinion that they should know, that they will know.
And even just because it's like it's industry, it's written in vet language, right? All of the units of competency are written in vet language. They're not written in industry language. So you have to translate it for the student and for the employer and for the supervisor, for the host employer, whatever it's going to be. You've got to articulate all of that sort of stuff.
And don't forget, no matter what assessment method you use, you have to apply the principles of assessment and rules of evidence.
So what I thought would be interesting is if we talk about this in context of 2 of probably the hardest unit types to do this with, and that is sustainability and innovation. So almost every qualification has a sustainability unit now.
Do you know a lot of units even have sustainability built into them?
They do.
And you just don't necessarily recognize
more and
more.
more.
Absolutely. What environmental noise pollution are we dealing with right now?
So loud.
It's because it's only over there.
I know. Because Cairns is a small town.
Yes, we're sitting down at the northern end of the Esplanade here in Cairns. If you know of Cairns, or
And if you do come to it, you should go to the Guyala Cafe because they do a lovely breakfast.
they did a really good breakfast.
But they will not do blended coffee.
No, they won't do a blended coffee. Don't ask for a long black on ice.
So, all right. So, sustainability units, innovation units. I think everyone struggles with this because, as far as they're concerned, it's soft skills. Soft skills that we don't know how to assess soft skills. So, talk to me about. All right. I'm gonna lay the scenario. So, it's an innovation unit. And it's let's go with AQF 4, AQF 5, and they are responsible for promoting innovation and developing innovation within the team. This is a really complex. I think I've written 6 units on this in the last couple of weeks.
And you want me to identify direct and indirect evidence?
What would be some examples of direct evidence? Yeah.
Okay. So,
do you want me to give you a project?
That's an indirect evidence, isn't it? Already. Yeah.
So, okay, well, this is one that we did recently. So we did it for, it was actually an advanced diploma one. But we had them, they were working with like a little, kind of like a general store out in the country.
Right.
And it also had a little
like
cafe. Yep. Not quite that high up in the cave. But they had to do an innovative project. They wanted to find out how they could bring more fresh fruits in. So looking at either developing a small barramundi farm or a fresh foods farm or something along those lines. That was like the broad scope of the project. So thinking about it in terms of that, what would be some of the direct evidence that we could record, and what would be some of the indirect evidence that we could record on a project?
Well, at a level 4, you're looking at research abilities.
Yeah.
So you could research the opportunities and the scope, such as, has anybody else around them got any of this? What is the need for it regarding their current people that want it?
Yeah.
Definitely out in small country towns, it's very difficult to get fresh fruit if you were going to use that as an example. So they could look at innovative transport related to building it in. And you also wanted to deal with sustainability in the same unit. So you could deal with innovative ways of dealing with waste products, such as if you've already got what you have, what can you do with it? So you could team up with a garden centre if you have one and deal with mulch, for example.
Yep.
So you could give them some really good and fun activities associated with them thinking outside the square. You definitely would have to do it at a higher level because they have to think beyond just tasks.
Yeah.
They have to think more of the task management and contingency management, but definitely in even environmental situations, the dimension of competency.
Yeah. So we had them do, I think we had them do some basic market research. Yes. Then we had them working in a team to run some team meetings to get everybody, like everyone went out and did their own research. Then everybody came in and they talked about it and they decided on kind of what they thought would work well, what wouldn't work well, what were the challenges, responding to challenges. So there we had direct evidence of being able to do things like negotiate, encourage others,
communication to different organizations. You could then have a pitching session to see which one could go for particular funding. So they'd have to include calculations and other bits and pieces. So you are assessing them with their ability at that level directly regarding their own questioning ability. And then the indirect is the collective group project and documentation of their idea. And then direct by observing them doing pitches and conversations and negotiation.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Can I do this project?
It was I had so much fun researching all of that sort of stuff. It was really good. And then your indirect evidence is obviously things like, it might be an email to management with the final recommendation, and then there was a list of what needed to go into that email. And then, so that would have been one of our forms of indirect evidence. Now, I think one of the areas where people struggle with this most is when it comes to implementation. Because in most of these units, it's really easy to get students to go out and do some research and think outside the box and come up with proposals and things like that. But most of these units have a requirement to then implement.
Yes.
And when we're dealing with, let's say, international students, or even when we're dealing with trainees in the workplace and things like that, having the authority to actually implement a project that has money attached to it can be really challenging.
Yes, although there are a lot of opportunities online these days to create online forums and communities, and you can implement projects directly onto those.
Yeah.
You can have even the use of Monday and Slack and have those conversations on there, and it's directly gathering the evidence of them implementing as if they're having a team meeting to discuss an project plan or timeline.
Yeah.
So there are ways of doing the implementation without it being really real.
Yeah. And I think also building out really clear, detailed project plans, running a project implementation meeting, with people, that can start to get into a lot of that implementation as well.
You can have case studies.
Absolutely.
And scenarios.
Yeah.
So you can break up the points of the project to say, okay, we're now sitting down and having that discussion with your potential funding, equity, venture capital person.
Yeah.
But there are also the ability, and I would strongly suggest anybody doing any sort of big projects to make it really real and try and connect with a lot of venture capital, angel funded people, because they're more than happy to talk about how to, especially in the entrepreneurial space and innovation, how to apply or pitch to an investor.
Yeah.
And they want more and more people to know, because it makes their life easier when people finally come out into the real world after doing one of these innovative entrepreneurial sustainability courses, to go, you're actually coming with real life and a network connection.
Yeah.
Because you've spoken to them.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of them out there.
And I think for Cricos ones, guys, have them doing projects in your own schools. So like, if you've got a Cricos college that focuses on hospitality and you've got to do a sustainability unit, like think about areas where, do you have a recycling program in your school? Do you have like a program for like, how you utilize the additional waste in your school?
Yeah.
All of these sorts of things. Like think about ways that they can actually encourage, and when they can demonstrating leadership in a Cricos college, have some of the older students mentoring your younger students. So like build it in as, basically that brings in a lot of additional support services for some of the younger students. It's creating connections, and it actually has like really positive impacts across the whole school when you can build some of that sort of stuff.
Yeah. If your campus is really big, have interdepartmental competitions as well. You could, if you're doing any engineering or construction, they might be able to work with you.
Yeah.
And to have an amazing outcome for the school itself and make it really real.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm excited. We are.
All right, guys. So that was us for today. We've got one more of these sessions coming up. If you want more, though, just say the word.
Yay! Comment below. Subscribe.
Talking about this stuff. I'm Lauren. You can find all of our stuff at aniwaya.org. The Divine Miss M, you can find all of her stuff at Prickly2Sweet. You can also get her book on Audible, on Amazon. I've got mine on Apple Books. It's all over the place.
Yeah.
If you want a signed version, you can get it from her website. So there you go. Anything else?
No, can't wait till the next one.
We'll see you in I'll see you in 30 seconds.
Okay.
We'll see you in a week. Bye, guys.
Bye.